Smile. All right. Today is February 3rd, 2012, and we're in the home of Ellen Opsal. Thank you, Ellen, for sharing your information with us.
Well, I'm excited about this.
Okay, very good. Tell us where and when you attended country school.
Okay, I was born in Audubon County on a farm, and so it was Leroy number 2, that Leroy Township number 2, and I started in 1935 and I quit in 1948. Yes, 1948.
Okay, so that was, did you go to kindergarten?
Yes, a little, they had a little bit. I don't really remember much about it.
So you didn't move at all during your country. You were always on the same farm?
Yes, my dad and his uncle owned the farm, and you know, of course, during the Depression, I didn't realize it at the time, but I learned later that we were so glad it was paid for because they didn't lose it in the Depression. So
How far away did you live?
I was lucky, about a quarter of a mile. But, they always make the joke about walking uphill. Well, I really
Both
honestly,
ways.
yeah, both ways. I really honestly did walk uphill. And it was quite a steep hill. The schoolhouse was on a pretty good sized hill.
What tasks did you have to perform before leaving for school?
Well, like most kids, had to make my bed and get dressed. And I can remember there was a radio program on, and I don't remember the name of it, but it kind of helped me get dressed on time because he'd say, "Are you putting your socks on?" and then things like that. And so I must have been kind of slow getting dressed because Mother always had that program on. And then, of course, I ate breakfast. Always oatmeal, good healthy breakfast, but I didn't do any farm chores in the morning.
What did you wear to school?
Well, dresses, and in the winter, in the winter you'd have long underwear. And it's, the old-fashioned drop seat underwear, that they don't make hardly anymore. And then long stockings. It's very hard to get long stockings up over long underwear without getting the underwear all bunched up here. And I always had a nice snowsuit. And I can remember Mom had put a scarf around here and a scarf around here, so only my eyes showed. And I can remember walking over fences from the snow. And so it was, and I remember one time, and I was very young, and my brother, who was 9 years older than I was, would have been in high school, but evidently high school either he couldn't get there or they didn't have high school. But he was home, and Mom had him walk me to school because the teacher I had, you asked me if I had preschool or whatever, and her name was Reynolds, and she was a strange old maid school teacher. But she had the very best of intentions, and I tell you, our farm is about 3.5 miles north of Audubon, and then a mile east and she walked every day. She walked, and on this snowy day, very deep snow, she made it to school. Now that is really dedication that you just don't see today. And I remember after school, Mom went out and went out to the road and said, "Wouldn't you like to stay the night?" "Oh no, I'm fine, I'll make it." And she was back the next morning.
So she lived in town and walked out to this rural school.
Yes. Yes. And I only had her 1 year. She was older. She probably retired. I really don't know, but
I got tired of the walk.
yeah.
Now you started to tell us your brother one morning. Was he
Oh,
walking? You just-
he walked me to school that snowy morning. The same morning that the teacher walked out. I mean, she did it every morning, but
Was your sister closer in age? Would you have been able to walk?
yeah,
to
she's
school?
5 years and
Older or younger?
older, and she must have been along. I honestly don't remember, but she must have been along that day too. But that's the day we walked over fences and everything. Didn't know where the road gullies were, and all. So.
Do you remember what time you would have left for school?
Well, on a decent day, about 8:30. School started at 9. I imagine on this day we left earlier because it took a while to plow through that snow.
Do you remember anything about those walks along the way? Do you remember?
Oh, yeah. Well, one thing I miss today because farming is so different. There's very few pasture lands, not even much hay land, certainly no oats anymore to speak of. And I miss the meadowlarks. They used to sing so pretty, and they'd often be sitting on the fence posts and stuff beside the road. And a meadowlark song is still probably my favorite bird song, but you just don't hear it anymore because there just aren't any meadowlarks here because we don't have any meadows. So that was one thing. And of course, there were cows out in the field, and they, cows are very curious. They'd come over to the fence and say hello. And but other than that, I guess that's about it.
Tell me about your schoolhouse and its surroundings.
Well, okay, on the outside, of course, that they were on an acre, always on an acre, and this acre was actually part of our farm, and I really don't know what the procedure was for our family to give this acre to the school. I don't know, but it was part of our farm, and so it's on an acre, and I said it was on a hill, and where the building sat, it was pretty flat, and then it went downhill quickly on the one side. We used to sled down that hill and jump off over into the road until one of the boys broke his arm, and then that stopped. So it was on a hill. We had a big swing set that had 2 or 3 swings and a trapeze, and I now have my tooth fixed. But it was broken by the trapeze, and it was when I was young, and I didn't realize what a bad thing that was. I know I can remember Mother crying, and into the dentist we went and all. And I realized later what I had done, but I didn't at the time. But what I was doing on the trapeze, I was swinging, and then I would go, flip off, and I flipped off and stood up. And so that's how it happened. And then we also had a glider. You have a seat on each end, and you would get it going, and you could, glide pretty high. And then over on the one side is where we played a lot of softball. Like I said, that was sort of on a hill, but we played there anyway. And inside, well, we had just a small wooden porch on the front of the school, not covered or anything, just wood platform, and that's where we did our jump rope and stuff like that. But then it had a little coat room, and you would hang your coats in there, put your lunch pails in there. The water bucket pail was in there. A basin for washing your hands and all. And in the wintertime, you did not leave your lunch out there because by lunchtime it would be frozen. So you brought your lunches in and put them in the school. And often, right, we had a a huge stove, you know, much bigger than down at the Little Red Schoolhouse. That's just little, but ours was huge and round. And we used to put our lunch pails around the bottom, and at night we'd put our ink bottles under there to keep them from freezing. Okay, and so then you'd go inside, and it had windows on the east side and the north side, which would be back. And I read somewhere the window should be on the left side and the back, and that's exactly the way they were. But and the little kids, the little desks were over nearest the east windows. But even on a really dark, rainy day, it still got awful dark in there. We had, of course, no electricity and no lanterns or anything were there either.
No gas lights, no.
No, nothing. We had a sandbox that I can remember playing in.
Inside.
Inside, yeah. On legs, you know, and we had little cars in there, and it was fun. I played in there a lot when, you know, little. And of course the teacher's desk was over to one side. We had 2 blackboards, and they were truly blackboards, big heavy slate boards, Washington and Lincoln's picture, and a clock, and well, I guess that's about what I can remember of it. Coal room off to one side that my brother found out how we never did anything bad in there, but he found out how to get into the school through the coal room, and we got in there one time. And I'll have to tell a tale on my brother. This was when he was a freshman in high school, and we got in there, and he thought he would play a joke on the teacher, and so he took the bell and he put it in the damper of the stovepipe, and it burned the handle off. And his first chore in his manual training was to make a new handle for the bell. I can remember that.
How'd they find out he was the culprit?
Well, I don't really know. Maybe we blew it. My sister and I, maybe. I don't really know. But anyway, I don't recall getting in the school after that. I'm sure Mom and Dad had something to say about that.
Were there trees on the playground?
Trees. Yes, one out. I forgot to say we had a flagpole out front, and there was a young tree out by the flagpole. And then further, actually not on the school ground, but right beside, the land, there were some trees. But otherwise, no.
Any outbuildings?
Oh, yeah. The 2 famous ones, Oh, how I hated them. Especially the first time in the fall, because there were always spiders in there. And I don't like spiders to this day. I realize they do good things a lot, but I still don't like spiders. And not that I go screaming off when I see one, like some people do, but I just don't care for them. So we had a girls and a boys, of course, and other than that, there were no outbuildings. We did have a well down at the bottom of this hill, but the water was not potable, so we couldn't drink it.
So where did the water come from?
From my uncle's farm, which was even closer than ours, and we would take, the older children would take turns, two of them, going up to my uncle's farm and getting a bucket of water. And I can remember as young children, we had a dipper, and everybody drank out of that dipper until I was about in 4th grade, and then we got a teacher that insisted we all bring our own little tin cup. And ever after that, we had our own little tin cup.
What did you do once you arrived at school?
Well, you could play on the playground for a little bit, although we didn't arrive that much early. And then you'd go in, and of course, if you had a coat, you'd hang it up and all, and take your seat right away, and say good morning to the teacher, kind of all together, and then we'd say pledge to the flag, and maybe we'd sing a song, not always, but we might sing a song, and then get to work. She would explain, you'd usually have stuff written on the board, and just get to work then.
Tell me about the inside of the building.
Inside of what?
The building.
Well, I said it
I
had,
guess we've talked about the stove and the windows and the,
yeah,
and
I
maybe
mean,
we've already done that.
there's not much more I can tell.
How about a piano? I can stop it. Okay. Oh, excuse me. A piano in your school?
No, we had a Victrola, and we sang, always loved music. We sang 2 Victrola records, and the old Susanna, you know, and those kind of songs. And of course, I still remember all the words. And I remember one of my friends, she was a year older, and she and I sang White Christmas at our Christmas program one year. And we always had a little piece to memorize and say, and all that kind of stuff.
Were the desks attached to the floor?
They were on runners, but I believe the runners were attached, yes.
What kinds of supplies did your school have? Many books? You've already talked about the chalkboard.
Yeah. Well, McGuffey readers, but I do know that the parents had to buy new books, you know, every year, like a work type book and things like that. So I can remember Mom going into town to buy the books. We did not have a library. I don't even think we had a set of encyclopedias that I remember, and so it was pretty minimal what was there. We didn't miss anything because we didn't know. We didn't know we were supposed to have other stuff.
How about items like pencils and chalk and crayons? Did your parents furnish those
Yes,
too?
yes. And I loved to get the new box of crayons, and I would take really good care of my crayons. Some kids, you know, tear all the paper off and then they break, but I would take really good care of my crayons because I love to color, and I liked you'd open a new box and you'd get that smell and all. So I loved having my new crayons.
And where would your parents have purchased those things?
We had a 5 and dime store.
Tell me how the teacher organized the school's day's lessons.
Well, we usually had, almost always had 8 classes, and the reason was because just a mile away was a little village called Ross, and so quite a few children came from that little village of Ross. So we had one of the bigger country schools in that area. But so she, often had all 8 classes, and she would put on the board what the older children should start to work on, put a schedule up, what they could read in social studies and what they could do in math and that kind of thing. And then she would start working with the little kids and usually bring us up to the recitation bench. I forgot to mention we had a recitation bench. And, it was usually reading and phonics and she'd work with us, and then we always had a workbook. And I said our county superintendent's name was Miss Rendelman, and she would come around probably 2 to 3 times a year and visit. And I was always scared to death when she'd come, she was nice. I realize now she was nice, but I was scared to death. And she would come and sit down beside you and say, "Okay, let's look at your reading workbook," and then she'd go through like that.
So she knew each one of you.
Yes,
Personally.
yes.
Did you have the same county superintendent
All the years. Mm-hmm. All the years.
How did the day's experience vary between the grade levels? Maybe we can think more about the younger ones and older ones.
Of course, the subject matter varied. They would start science and social studies and stuff more like 3rd, 4th grade. And, of course, in the lower grades, we didn't have that. The older kids did an awful lot of work on their own, but she would bring them up, and they would go to the recitation bench, too. And it was kind of neat. The little kids could listen in, and you'd be surprised what you would pick up and learn from just hearing them talk and discuss about it. I must confess, I told you I was not good in math, and I was up to the board one time, and she had us turned around with our back to the board, and she would ask a question. And the one question she asked me was, how many feet in a mile? And I thought, and I did not know how many feet were in a mile. Well, one of the boys that I kind of liked, and he kind of liked me, he wrote it down on a piece of paper and held it up for me. And so then I turned around and wrote it on the board. Oh, jeez. Memories.
How many students were in your grade?
In my grade? Oh, just 2. A boy named Paul and I went all the way through grade school and high school together. We graduated together. And he was a farm boy, and then he farmed, and he and I shared. I was very good in reading, and he was not, and he was very good in math, and I was not, so we kind of made quite a team there.
Then how many children were in the school?
Well, I would say there was probably usually 15 would be a good average. When you stop and think of a teacher having 15 students in 8 different classes, I cannot imagine how much time they spent, thinking about their lessons and all. Wonderful, wonderful teaching. I think I got a very good education. And when we went into high school, it was always the country kids that were the top students. Our valedictorian and salutatorian were both country kids, and then, the rest of us, I wasn't that high, but I think I was 6th or 8th or something in my class. And, most all of those kids were country students, because we learned how to work on our own and dig it out on our own. So.
Do you remember some lesson activities that you did? as a
Lesson
child?
activity. Do I have anything down on
I'm
that?
on the second page. About the fifth one, sixth one
Oh,
down
wait a
under
minute, I
school
turned-
lessons.
I have the wrong page here. Okay. Items were what were some of the activities you remember? Oh yes, I do. When I was just little, I read a story, and I don't know whether it was in one of the McGuffey readers or a different one, but a story about a little elephant that could stand on its head. And do you know, I can still remember that, and I can see that cute little baby elephant in the picture standing on its head.
Isn't that something?
So, and I did a lot of reading because I was good. You know, you do what you are good at. You know, instead of working on what you should work on. I did love geography. I love drawing maps freehand. We did quite a lot of that, drawing maps by freehand. Now I was going through my grade reports, and I often saw that I didn't get really high grades in geography, but I still like it. So, and I've always enjoyed history too, from grade school on through college. I enjoyed history, and I love history programs on TV today. So that was always an interest of mine.
And you already told me your least favorite would have been
Math.
because
I just have a really hard time remembering, you know, like you have to remember how to do fractions, and I never could remember how to do the fractions and all that. I just am not good in math to this day. So.
how much did you interact with other students?
Yeah, a lot, because we went to school, you know, for most of the kids stayed put. There wasn't a lot of change in who was in the school, and so you got to be really good friends. And I had this little town, this little village of Ross. My best friend came from there. Her name was Alice Ann. Everybody was called by two names. Alice Ann, and she was one grade younger than me, but we were real close. And one time I remember in the summer, my dad always went to the state fair, and I, you know, older, I'm sure we were in high school, and I got to take Alice Ann with me to the state fair. So yeah, we did a lot. We, you know, jumped rope. Somebody had to turn, you know, and play Annie over, and so yeah, lots of softball. We played lots of softball, and the older kids were even good about letting the little kids play. You know, they'd let them be a fielder or something, you know, and so.
Did your teacher ever have any helpers?
No.
What kinds of rules did you have in your classroom?
Well, you didn't speak without permission. You would raise your hand to speak. You would raise your hand for permission to go to the outhouse, and you didn't use it very often. I mean, you know, she would deny it if you asked too often. I really don't remember discipline problems. The kids, even the older boys, and some of the boys were pretty good sized, you know, and some of the teachers were kind of little, but I just really don't remember them causing problems. Back then, if you got in trouble at school, you got it a lot worse at home, and so there just weren't the discipline problem. People, they didn't, you know, talk out like kids do today and stuff like that. So.
So you don't remember any discipline? You don't know what kinds of techniques your teacher did to reinforce?
No, I think just at the beginning of the year, stating what they were and probably what would happen. I don't ever remember anybody having to stand in the corner or anything like that. We certainly did not have a dunce cap. I think that was a terrible thing, and we didn't ever have anything like that. So. Oh, another thing, we had to keep our feet out of the aisles so that people didn't trip. And you couldn't just run over to the teacher's desk, you know, you had to raise your hand and...
Tell us about lunchtime.
Well, it was an hour long, which was nice. And of course we ate at our desk, and you know, the kids would bring, some of the kids, there were some farms really close, and they might go home, and I would go home in nice weather. I'd ride my horse, Lady K, to school, and put her out, and she would keep all the grass mowed in the ditches, and then I'd ride home for lunch and come back, because we had an hour. But in the winter time, oh, it was sledding. Everybody would bring their own sleds. And as I said, it's on a hill. So we had a great hill, and that hill went down to my farm, and there was just a little rise by my farm, and we'd sometimes shoot right over that little hill and keep going. And some of the older kids, this is another nasty, some of the older kids would have watches, and when it was almost time for the bell, we'd get ready and we'd slam off just as hard as we could, and maybe end up a half a mile away, and then you'd have to walk back and be late. So, yes, and we played lots and lots of softball, and the girls, you know, we got pretty good at hitting the ball too, and so it was fun. And like I said, it was an hour long, so we got some pretty good exercise.
Would the parents ever bring a hot meal in?
No, they didn't bring it, but as I said, we had that big stove. And sometimes the teacher would say, okay, Ellen, you bring a carrot, and Alice Ann, you bring a potato, and so forth. And we'd end up with vegetable soup.
Stone soup.
That we made. That was pretty good.
What did you carry your lunch in?
Well, the beginning it was an old lard can, and then later on I did have the typical black lunch pail, and with a thermos, and in the winter I always had milk, and then in the winter Mother would usually have it be cocoa, and so I'd have something hot, and sandwiches. I don't remember if we ate a lot of peanut butter. I honestly can't remember. I can remember sometimes when I guess Mother couldn't think of anything else, she'd fry an egg real hard, you know, and squash out the yolk and everything until it was fried hard. And actually that makes a pretty good sandwich. And I'm sure we had a lot of meat sandwiches because we always ate meat every day.
How did your school day end?
Well, we had to clean up the room, and then I really can't remember anything in particular. I suppose if there was any special thing, the teacher would remind us about it or remind us to take a note home or whatever. Then sometimes you would get picked to sweep the floor, and you know, we thought that was lots of fun because you use sweeping compound, and you'd sprinkle the sweeping compound around, and then you'd get to sweep it up, and again, I liked the smell of that. That was kind of oily, made the floor look nice and shiny. We had nice oak floors in there, hardwood oak floors, and then you could sometimes stay and wash the chalkboards and bang the erasers, go outside and bang the erasers. But you didn't always do those things. That's once in a while.
So you were always in the same school, but you
Yes.
had different teachers.
Yes, yes.
Can you name all the teachers?
Yes, I all except 5th grade because I lost that. Okay. In 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade.
But you did have kindergarten.
Yes, and that was Miss Reynolds,
Okay.
the one that walked through the snowstorm.
Okay.
1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade was the same, and this is the only teacher I had that long, and her name was Ruby Von Heater.
Will you
And-
spell that for me?
Yeah, okay. Von, V-O-N, and then capital Heeder. And I really, really liked her. She was very understanding. In one report card, she said she's too young for her grade. and I was, I guess. 4th, I had Catherine Hillier, and that's Hillyer.
And was Catherine with a K or a C?
Yeah, Catherine with a K. And I don't remember who I had in 5th because I don't have that report. 6th grade was Margaret Johnson, and I had in another note I had here. She was a very young teacher and wasn't very good. Didn't really know how to do things very well. And then 7th grade was Margaret Newell, Newell, and Margaret Newell was a neighbor. She lived over on the, we were sort of on the east end of the mile, and she lived right on the west end. She faced the highway. Highway US 71 goes through Audubon, and she lived over there. She had a son named Darrell, and so she taught him part of the time. But she was also a very big favorite, and I only had her 1 year. Then, maybe this was 5th grade, but like I said, I had a man teacher. His name was Mr. Horning, and I don't know what his first name. And then he had to go to the service, and he left in December after Christmas. And then we had
Would that have been 41?
yeah. And I bet you he was my 5th grade teacher. I bet he was. And then a Lois Sundberg filled in the other half year. Now I want to tell you a story about Mr. Horning. Okay, he was a good teacher. I liked him. And when I came to Iowa State Teachers, lo and behold, there was Mr. Horning getting, I'm sure, his BA. And there were several of us from Audubon that went to Iowa State Teachers. And I remember one time riding home. He had a car, nobody else did, and riding home with him. And that was kind of a funny feeling, to think he was my teacher, and now here we are, students together,
Suppose he was on the GI Bill?
Probably, yeah, I'm sure he was. And I have no idea what he did after he graduated, whether he taught in Iowa. I don't have any idea. And then the 8th grade teacher was named Norma Rasmussen. And I really don't remember a lot about her, except I know we drilled hard for our 8th grade examination. But I was really, when I got going through, I was surprised that we had so much change all the time. Like I only had that one teacher for 3 years. Otherwise, everybody else was just 1 year. Which to me was kind of surprising, really. in the Depression that they didn't stay, for a job. I don't
So the
I don't
same
think
kids,
any
but
of them
new
were
teachers.
told they weren't
Oh, okay.
offered a contract that I know of.
Mhm.
Of course, kids, we weren't told a lot back then, so it could have been, I suppose. But outside of that, Margaret Johnson, I think all the rest of them did very well.
Was it Johnson or Johnston?
Johnson.
Did you remember seeing your teachers outside of the school day?
No, outside of Margaret Newell, who was our neighbor. I'd sometime even ride my horse over there and talk to her out in her yard. But no, the rest of them, they just kind of seemed to disappear. I don't know where they went. None of them belonged to my church, at least that I know of. So.
Did anyone help the teacher take care of the schoolhouse other than the jobs that you students had?
Well, there were farmers. They mowed. And in the summer, there was always a farmer that would put up an electric fence and have cows in there to keep it down. But that they had like a board, and they would, repair, put on a new needed it and that kind of stuff. And my mother was secretary for many, many years, and my sister told me, which I did not know, that before Mother, my dad was, and when he quit, then Mother just took it over. But it was her job. I can remember her sitting down with the Lattice catalog and ordering chairs, or, the little chairs that we had at the reading circle and that kind of stuff. And she would order, things like maps or that kind of stuff.
We didn't talk about maps in the classroom when we talked about supplies.
Okay, we had one of those maps that pulls down with many different maps on it that you could roll up and over to get a, you'd have an Iowa map and a United States map and a world map and I don't know what other. I imagine there was one of just showing the continents. I really don't remember what all, but there were quite a few maps on that roll thing.
Any extra supplies that your school had? We've talked about the map.
Like it was pretty slim. Like I said, we had some readers, and
did the county superintendent bring books from the county library? The county superintendent's library?
I don't remember that
Do you
happening.
remember any library in your school?
No, we did
No
not.
books.
There was a library in Audubon,
Okay.
but I don't remember. There was none in school.
Well, you mentioned the 8th grade exam. What do you remember about the 8th grade exam?
Well, first of all, I was scared to death. We had to go into Audubon. Everybody in the county came in to the same, it was in the county courthouse in, I don't know, probably the judges, probably some big room. And of course you were well monitored, so you didn't cheat. And like I said, I was scared to death, especially on the math part. I did pass it, but not too much. And they were hard. The 8th grade examinations were very hard. They really were. And we reviewed a lot, for, I don't know, 6 weeks, I suppose. She would review, whatever. So.
Did you have an 8th grade graduation ceremony?
No. Didn't have, it was during the war, and I guess people just had a lot of other things to think about, you know. So,
And what did you do after graduation?
well, in the summer, I always helped make hay. We farmed with horses, and I drove the team on the hay rack. And I also drove the team putting hay up in the barn, which scared me because, well, they always used the biggest team that they had on that to bring the hay up in the barn, because the double tree and all would, and then the two single trees would lay on the ground until you started out. And then when it started to pull the hay up, you know, the hay was on one end of the barn and I was on the other, you know. And the double tree would come and it was just right at my head level. And I can remember walking off to the side in case something would break. I'm sure that they checked it over very carefully and all before they did this, but it still scared me. And once the hay would get up and hit that pulley up there, and the horses had to pull very hard. That's why I said they used the biggest team they had. And but when it hit the pulley up there, then the double tree would not fall all the way down, but would go way down, and then you'd turn around and go back and get ready for the next one. and the folks had a really neat way of telling us, because they wanted the hay in different parts of the mile. And so, and they had this gong thing up there up high on the barn. And when it would get to the part where they wanted it, my uncle was inside, and he would pull the gong, you know, and then that meant quit going. So I thought that was pretty neat, you know, instead of trying to yell or something. And my dad was then out on the hay rack fixing the big hay fork into the hay, because the hay was loose. And oh, it was so fun to play in the hay mow. That was one thing that we did a lot of. And you have one end of the hay mow that's up high, and that was usually pretty full of hay, and then they would drop some hay down lower so they could fork it out to feed the horses and the cows and stuff. And it was so fun to swing on the rope and drop down. And the only thing Dad always said, always check where the pitchforks are. Another thing he warned me about, because I love hogs. I know a lot of people don't, but I do. But he always said, don't get in the hog lot, because they could knock you down and they can be very dangerous. So I never went in. I loved the little pig. I had a pet pig once. Used to sit on my lap. It was a runt, and to be truthful, I'm sure they were just gonna throw it out, you know. And I begged and begged, couldn't I raise this little runt? And I did. I fed it, and I did this, and I did. It used to follow me all over the yard. It was no wonder I love pigs.
But he always stayed in the barn. Never.
Well, I made a special little pan up by the chicken house, and so he had his own little pen.
How long did you have him?
Well, he died, and I suppose there was something wrong with him, which is why he was a runt to begin with. And I felt so bad when he died, but I don't know. I suppose, you know, so they're born in the spring, and I suppose like midsummer, toward late summer, maybe August, he died.
Did he have a name?
Yeah, let's see. Yes, I even had